knocked out of the park, I'm sure, with a conversation that's absolutely critical. Daring conversations in difficult times. I think if we look at this country over the last 2 years specifically, we know that a lot of people are struggling with having difficult conversations. And I think in our classrooms, that is an ideal space for us to think about having some of these difficult conversations. So I think having a faculty member to walk us through these difficult times is going to be absolutely critical. So without further ado, our second annual Pride Talk, Daring Conversations in Difficult Times, Charlene Carolasia. Charlene.
So now that you took my talk, no, just kidding. Thank you so much for being here. So, can I listen? Can you? Can we trust each other to hold each other's deepest strengths, greatest fears, our scars safely? Will I regret if I tell you that I am 1 in 3, my wife is 1 in 8, and my daughter is 1 in 55? Will you hold my story gently if I tell you that I am terrified for my black son's future? Not what his future will look like, but merely whether or not he will be allowed one. These are vulnerable times. Tensions are high. I can worry for him, but not this way and not that way. There's a right way and a wrong way to express ourselves, to raise our voice, to stand up, but don't kneel. Folks are constantly telling us all the wrong ways, but we've yet to be led to the right one, the one that'll bring us to pause, back home to each other. Like a family with an invisible rule book, punished if you do and punished if you don't, there is no way to safely navigate the waters, and so we stop trying. We no longer challenge our Uncle John's at Thanksgiving dinner. No politics, no religion, nothing potentially inflammatory. And so we walk through our lives, even with those dearest to us, statistics with plastered on smiles. These are fragmented times, tensions are high. The hair on my arms, it's raising up. When we enter the ring, we're thrown into our separate corners. And when the bell rings, there's only one thing left to do. We come out, dukes raised, teeth bared. We are down for a fight. How many of you are with me so far? And how many of you, like me, are tired of fighting? Okay, so here we are. So today's talk is a bit of a mashup of some great contemporary minds. This is in the back table. If you're interested in reading more about any of them, you can grab it on the way out. Okay. So what I'm presenting today is not original to me. What I'm presenting is really a compilation of my desperate need to find a way to navigate through these waters and still stand up for what I believe in. Okay. And so this is a framework that's been working for me and that I hope to offer to all of you. So I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for 25 years. This is actually my 25th anniversary. Thank you. Started in a rape crisis center as a 20-year-old in 1993. Okay. And what I love about social work is that our mission speaks directly to eradicating oppression and advancing social justice. Now that mission is unique among professions, and that mission revs my engine every day. And so social workers can be organizers, case managers, therapists, teachers, educators, lobbyists, and more. And my organizing hat is actually one that I wear with great pride. And so I do need to take one moment to offer a quickie shout out to some of the folks who have been organizing with me over the past few years. So thank you so much for being with me. So what we know, even by the mere fact that we're organizing, is that tensions are high. Okay? We have something that is scheduled. There's a protest every weekend if you want to go, every day on every weekend if you feel like it, and sometimes you can protest hop throughout the day. There is something to stand for. There is something to fight against. Okay. And so even among organizers, there can be a lot of infighting. And so even this summer, for example, there was a group of us, some of us who are here and some of us who are not, who sat down to talk about and actually kind of fight about our mere belonging and whether or not our belonging to the group and our continued participation was something that was intrinsic and inherent or something we had to continuously prove ourselves for. So we're going back and forth like a ping pong ball, and I'm sitting there and I just started breaking down in tears. It's my default. I'm a crier. Okay? But what it led me to realize is that if we're fighting like this, even within our affinity groups, even with those with whom we agree, what hope is there with those, quote unquote, across the aisle? So these are a couple of pictures of just some of the events that I've been involved in over the past couple of years. Okay? And I illustrate this just because what I want to ask all of you to do is to make an assumption or to join me in the assumption of deepening conflict and enhanced polarization in our communities and in our world. Okay. Still with me? Great. Okay. So the other assumption, and this is where I'm going to kind of dare a little bit, start to, is that we're in the middle of this collective trauma response, okay? And again, if you look for resources on your way out, you're going to get a little bit more about some of this stuff. But as a collective, as a community, as a society, we're activated. We're a little more hypervigilant. We're on alert. How many of you feel like you can't watch live news without risking your mental health? Okay? Who's turned off their Facebook feeds at least, you know, for a weekend, long weekend, week, forever? Okay? So we're getting triggered and agitated on the regular. Okay? And what we know about trauma is that trauma has an impact on our body. So this is neuroscience, but it's also about our nervous systems, our cardiovascular systems, okay? So trauma has an impact on our body, and these are kind of the three most common responses to trauma, okay? So, fight. This is the irritability. This is the duking it out, okay? This is when we have dig our heels in, play that tug of war game, and we're in it to win it, okay? So that can be a response for many folks. Sometimes I go there. Flight. These are the conflict avoidant folks. Okay, these are the folks who are like, I don't care about this that much. This is the reason we're not challenging Uncle John at Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? It's that flight to take care of ourselves, self-preservation, right? And then we have our freeze response. Okay? This is kind of the numbing out. This is me when I get shocked and start crying before I can actually respond. It takes me a while to kind of gather myself, to pull back in. Okay? It can be giving up easily. It can be detaching. It can be throwing your hands in the air. I'm going to date myself. Wave them like you just do. Okay, apparently I really did date myself. Thank you. Gotcha. All right. So what's happening is that this was trauma responses we often relegated to issues of profound traumatic individual experiences. You know, every once in a while we'd be generous and say there were collective responses in large matters like war, veterans, war times, et cetera. But there's actually some pretty decent research out there that this is happening to us right now. So, for example, about 10 days ago, Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the Supreme Court. Okay? So I'm not going to get into the ins and the outs of that. I just want to tell you what I saw. So I was on court steps. There was a gathering specifically for people to get together to be with each other as that ruling came down. When it was announced, you can hear a mumble, one person to the next person. Literally, people said, "It is done." To the next person, to the next person. It took 10 to 15 minutes for those of us specifically there to be in solidarity with folks who needed it before we actually could compose ourselves to do what we came there to do. Okay. That's the collective trauma response. Okay. So this is often what it looks like. We're in a group of people, and then all of a sudden, all we see are these angry faces. So where we can become aware is where we can take responsibility for our actions in a given moment and where we can sidestep our own defensiveness. And that truly is the point around how we're going to be able to come home to each other. Okay? So where we can become aware of our reactions and our responses is where we can take responsibility for our choice making in a given moment and where we can sidestep our own defensiveness. Okay, so how? So the first thing, intention. Do we listen to win or do we listen to listen? Okay. Sit with that one for a second because we all know the answer. I'm a fighter, right? The other day, I've been with my wife for 20 years next year, and so we know each other, right? We have each other's MOs down. We know where we go when we fight. She asked me a very simple question, and I was like, I just can't. She goes, I wasn't asking you to do anything. And I'm like, yeah. We don't have to look at these deep, profound conversations with this quote-unquote enemy other to find where we get our backs up and where we need to fight. And we very much fight to win. So instead, the practice is, and this takes practice, none of this stuff is easy, is to actually listen. So in the School of Social Work, we often torture our students by putting them through these activities called role plays. Right? So I'm going to guinea pig everybody for literally 20 seconds because it doesn't really work in a mic'd room, okay? So here's what I want you to do. I need you to make a comment about the weather to the person next to you. So make eye contact with somebody right now. Doesn't matter who it is. This is quickie, okay? And the comment is going to be something about the weather, and the other person's response is not, but it's cold as heck, you know, but, okay? Your response is, and, ... Okay? That's all I want you to practice. Okay, ready? Comment about the weather. Go. Okay, come on back. Does that feel a little bit different? Because I know we were all ready to be like, but I miss summer. Okay. All right. So the and statements are joiners, right? This is where we can bring our intentions to life. They're joining statements. They engage somebody in the dialogue. The but statement, rebuttal, right? That's instantly fighting. It's going to get somebody else's back up. Okay? So intention. All right. So as a culture, we've accepted these, seem to have accepted these two big premises that are both lies. One is that you, in order to love somebody, you have to agree with everything that they say and everything that they believe in. And the other is the exact opposite, right? That if somebody disagrees with you, you have to hate them and other them. Okay? And the way back home actually is to kind of abandon this and to enter into the equation compassion and non-judgment. So where we can meet ourselves with compassion and non-judgment is where we can find our way back home to each other. So the second one, this one is really hard for folks, especially me. Don't take it personally. Now I told you that this framework comes out of other people's stuff that I've pulled together in order to save myself. So don't take it personally. I'm the first person to do it. So if somebody tells me racism doesn't exist, I'm the only white member in my family, I showed you a picture of my son. My first response, how dare you? Racism affects my family members' lives on a daily basis. And that's the gentle version, okay? But don't take it personally doesn't mean that it doesn't profoundly impact us. What it means is that I don't take your comment to reflect my value and my worth. What you say and do says more about you than it does about me. So we take that window into each other, and when it gets our back up, when it gets us defensive, use it as a mirror. Again, it doesn't mean it doesn't profoundly affect us. What it means is in that moment, I can have a view into your experience, into your pain, into your fears, and I could know that this says more about you than it does about me. Does that help, folks? Okay. It's a little self-protective, and it's also a gift because it allows the attention to stay on the other person for a bit. Okay. Excellent. Pema Chodron says that often when you drop the meaning and the stories and the scripts that we're giving ourselves when we're rehearsing that fight back, she talks about you can feel the feelings but drop the story, and that becomes a place where you can make some conscious changes. Practice the pause. How many of you rehearse what you're going to say to somebody? I know this is true for students. Before there's a period at the end of the sentence. Okay? So I've already offended half the room, so now I'm going to offend the other half. So if, for example, someone is talking to me about the Department of Justice opinion that recently came out that basically says that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered individuals are not necessarily protected by the Civil Rights Act. Okay? So now that there's an opinion, it opens it up to kind of go through the stages and end up at the Supreme Court. Okay? So if I'm talking about how that terrifies me and my ability to potentially protect my family and provide for my children, and someone is pulling out their Bible and quoting Leviticus before I put a period at the end of that sentence, is that unifying or divisive? And so practicing the pause is really just about stopping. It's about practicing stopping, even when we're defensive, even when our back is up, even when we're hurt, because very often in these difficult conversations we are hurt. Okay. The pause is also the place where we can introduce compassion and non-judgment. And I want to spend the rest of the time around this compassion and non-judgment, because what we know is that these conversations are messy, mistake-making, critical, in some communities unfounded, unearthed territory, okay? And you're gonna mess up. I told you I'm the only white member of my family. My wife is Haitian. She calls me out regularly. Shar, check your privilege. Okay? Regularly, even after all this time. Okay? We are going to mess up. And this is where we need to think about our definition of courage. You know, Brene Brown, again, part of the mashup, she redefines courage. She says, when you actually look at the root of the word courage, cur means from the heart. You know, and that means, you know, we're not talking about fists and we're not talking about fighting. We're talking about vulnerability, risking being authentic with ourselves and communicating from the heart. The other thing that she says about being vulnerable is she says, if we're going to find our way back to each other, that vulnerability is going to be that path. She also warns us that when vulnerability is restricted to those that are safe and privileged, we no longer will have the capacity to create the schools, the homes, and the country that we love. So for us, we need to stay in it in order to be able to work towards our futures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my great mentors, also a social worker. Once when I was having a really tough time, she said to me, you know what? Our challenge is to live with integrity and love in this sometimes cruel and painful world. To feel those feelings, but to stay open to the beauty and the love around us. So I ask all of you to stay in it and stay open with me, because as we work to save the world, we may just save ourselves along the way. Thank you.
Sharing conversations in difficult times, great topic for a great time for us to have some questions. So we've got an opportunity, about 15 or so minutes for the audience to ask any questions of our presenter today. Any questions out there? I will come to you with a mic.
somebody who took part in the Women's March, what were some of your views on that? Or you must have come across some diversity in that for some of the things that you took part in. What gave you that drive to do that?
You know, I think for me, there are these defining moments where I have to decide whether or not to act. You know, am I going to be part of the solution? And when I look around, you know, at my children and, you know, my communities and my mission, it was really about a decision to act. What folks don't necessarily know about the Women's March is that it was this spontaneous, organic thing that nobody had any idea what the heck we were doing. And oftentimes it was a Facebook post where someone is saying, we need something in Hartford, and that's what happened in Hartford, Connecticut, which is where I was, we were. We need something in Hartford. Who's willing to fill out the permit and give their cell phone number? Well, what you know about giving a cell phone number is that's the beginning of the end, right? So for me, it was really about a decision to act. It was not about a decision to lead. That kind of just happened. So I think we all face those moments, those defining moments where we decide which way we're going to head. So.
I have a question. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
This language of the way back home to each other is new to me. So what if you could unpack that a little bit? Like, what's it mean? Is it like a vision? Is it an assumption of things? Like, just talk to me a little bit about what that phrase means and where you came across it and how you understand it.
That's a tough question. You know, I think it's when you look at kind of the resources that went into this talk, it's kind of a combination of social work meets psychology meets spirituality and Buddhism. And one of the books is Radical Dharma, and it actually blends anti-racism work with spirituality. And so the way back home really comes more from the spiritual messaging, but that the idea that we're all interconnected, we depend on each other, we're community, and that it's actually in relationships with each other that we are home. So home would be relationships with each other. And so the basic premise of her work, this is Reverend Angel Williams, is this idea that until we actually can sit with each other in the grief of what we've done, we're not going to be able to move forward together. So it's that idea of hiding from our own pain and grief. So.
I'm kind of sitting in the hotbed of an experience with someone close in my life where we're dialoguing about something where we have different values. And I'm going in and out and up and down and all around trying to figure out how to stay connected and have different values. Can you speak to that in some way?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. The closer you are to the folks you disagree with, the harder it is. You know, I mean, when I'm giving the example of the Women's March and the affinity group kind of fighting over who belongs and who doesn't, you know, these are folks we're intimate with, but we're intimate with for a short period of time, right? We just met, you know, a couple of years ago. We're intimate around what we're getting done, how we're getting it done, and unifying around principles, okay? So when you're with somebody, whether it's a partner, a family member, or someone really close to you, where you're disagreeing with some fundamental stuff, and I think that's what's so hard about this time right now. We're basically talking about fundamental whose lives actually do matter. And folks are debating this, you know? So it's less about issues and more about our own humanity. So I think that's the place to start, is where can we agree? You know, I was in high school, and one of my teachers had said to me, you know what, folks actually agree on about 95% of morality. I'm not sure if statistically that would hold up now, but I do think we actually fundamentally do agree a lot more than we disagree, but somehow the divisiveness is what comes to the top. And so oftentimes what I'll say is we can agree on this, but when it comes to this, can you just hear me? that this is the value I hold up. Don't debate it, don't argue it, don't try to change it. Just hear me, that this is the value I hold up. And that may be a place to start. If you can leave it standing without it having to get picked apart, that may be progress. So I know it's a lot more complicated than that. Yeah.
I really appreciated your, I'm good. I really appreciated your comment about people who are with you and having to agree with everything, and also people who have differences and you don't have to disagree with everything. So really finding that space of being able to agree to disagree, but also keep the relationship intact. So it ties into what you were saying. But I thought that was very interesting how you talked about that, because I think, you know, there is some commonalities that we have, but sometimes we try to other, I think you said more eloquently than I, other enemy and just totally disregard everything because we have some disagreement. So thank you, that was helpful.
Thank you. So just for the sake of the recording, what Dr. Hill is talking about is this idea of othering and how we can use our common ground and really kind of, I'm paraphrasing, but sink into that common ground as a way to avoid othering. You know, and I use the term othering, that is kind of coming out as, you know, one of the new buzzwords about what's happening now, is that the more you disagree with somebody, the less humanely you treat them, the less human you see them. And so we need to find these joining points in order to be able to continue to hold each other up in high esteem. So I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Well, Charlene, thank you so much for your discussion. And one thing that I'm kind of grappling with in conversations I have with people that are, I would call them acquaintances. Well, some of them are there's one in particular who's very close, a former colleague of mine who I consider a pretty good friend, is that they care about, I feel, or I come from a place where I do believe they care about the nation and the well-being of us, because they're good people that I know them in a social context, but their ideas of how to get there are different. So I kind of feel like, from my experience with everything that's going on, that's very, as you and I have had discussions, it's very challenging for me as well, is that I think there are different kinds of disagreements that may exist, some that is value driven, but some that are different opinions of how we can pull this nation together because of the challenges. And I'm wondering, does that, my question kind of make sense? I'm not sure if it does make sense, or if you think that I'm just naive in that these people that have a different opinion about how to bring the nation together are racist, or are, you know, that I just don't see that in them, and maybe I should be a little bit more perceptive about where they're coming from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're talking about is you're talking about acquaintances you have relationships with. So I wouldn't necessarily second guess your perceptions about that. You know, that if you're actually able to pause to actually hear behind, you know, what the kind of posturing is and what the issue is underneath the motivations around, well, because I think we can get here, then you're actually talking about some potential solutions. You're talking about somebody who is willing to join and partner up with others. You know, so there is a little hope there. You know, it's, so the divisiveness is always optional. Now, it takes two to tango, right? So for you, you have friends who are willing to engage with you in that conversation. I think what we're seeing more and more is folks who are not willing to engage, you know? And at that point, you know, my belief for me, this is my personal belief for me, is that I would much rather invest myself in engaging with somebody who's willing, you know, because there is enough work to do there, and then kind of spread out and ripple out from there. But that willingness for me is really important, because otherwise we're just offended over and over again, and don't take it personally, don't take it personally, don't take it personally only gets us so far. So there are ways that self-protection can be good too. But I admire that. It seems like in some ways you're already doing it.
But they're very set in their ways, and so I don't know if it's a value discussion. I don't know if there's, you know,
Yeah.
underlying it, I don't know if there, we have fundamental difference in values under, and that's what I don't know.
Right.
I don't know that.
So the dare may be that's the next question, you know, and that's what we ask. What are we actually talking about here? What is your belief about this, the humanity of the people behind this issue?
Okay, thank you.
You know.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes, I'll come right on over.
I want to thank you for doing this. I think this is a really important topic, because I think if we don't talk to people we disagree with, then the one time we have these conversations are with people we do agree with, and people just become more radicalized. So thank you for doing this today. The thing I think that's difficult here is I think a college campus is actually the perfect environment for having these conversations. And I think one of the challenges is, you know, to have a discussion is to invite dissent. And I think a college campus is not a microcosm of the U.S. population. It's very left-leaning. So I think a couple of things happen. One is I think dissenting views, I think they don't feel safe coming up and talking about their views. And I don't know that we have the structure in place to invite that. And I think things like safe spaces are very important because you want people to feel welcome and open to be who they are. But I've seen other college campuses where they've used that to crush dissent. And I don't think that's happening here, but I think that's a system in place that could kind of put a hold on that. So I'm just wondering, how can we invite dissent, and how can we make people feel comfortable having these opposing views so that we can have these conversations, which are really important? Does that make sense?
That's a really excellent question. Unfortunately, I think part of this answer is so much bigger than me. You know, in terms of what the campus community can do, is willing to do, you know, in terms of being able to hold space for disagreement and dissent. Classrooms really are an optimum place for that. And a lot of times classrooms in the beginning of the semester will set up kind of rules for how they're going to function with each other, you know, group expectations, that kind of stuff. So, you know, I'm trying to think. So things as corny as using ouch and oops when you're offended to just flag people to their, you know, this is a little beyond my comfort zone, ouch, that hurt, and then it kind of triggers the class to slow down and unpack it. And kind of take it from there. In terms of safe zones, I tend to have very mixed feelings about them because it allows us to not have the conversations. And yet at the same time, I understand that the safe zones are important. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. But I don't even know if you have anything you can offer around this.
Yeah, so one of the things that we understand is that these difficult conversations occur on both the left and the right, you know, right? So one of the things we talk about is diversity of thought, and our faculty really have the opportunity in our classrooms to make sure that diversity of thought is being shared, but making sure it's being respectful, you know, and I think that's the concept that, you know, we find ourselves getting into trouble with. You know, people find themselves on both sides of the fence and or opposite sides of the fence, and when people feel like they're not respected, I think our faculty, and perhaps even sometimes our staff, feel like they don't have the tools and so forth to be able to get the class back together. You know, so I think that's part of the reasons why these difficult conversations may not take place, you know, as much as we would like for them to do. So, you know, we're encouraging through, you know, this program, through our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning to, you know, be able to dialogue, you know, and I think that's what Chris Hopla is here on campus trying to do. Shameless plug, tomorrow we have Dr. Beverly Tatum here on campus, and she will help us to unpack some of this as well. But they are indeed difficult to have, and I would argue that they're difficult again because we don't have the tools to be able to pull us back together once that separation occurs. Okay, so a question over there. I'm going to walk to the front. Pass that one.
Thanks, Charlene. I was wondering if you could speak to your opinion about the use of technology in communication, because my personal opinion is sometimes it's harder to have that dialogue within certain modalities. And are there any hints that you have with that?
That could be its own talk, naturally. So the use of technology when having some of these difficult conversations. So, there's a couple pieces to this. I have to say, when talking about the Women's March, March for Our Lives, a lot of the stuff, it is being organized largely on Facebook, okay? So it is actually quite a phenomenal platform for organizing. And then there's the other side, So, half the time, I'm looking through feeds and I don't recognize who somebody is at all, okay? And, the other half of the time I'm like, really, Ben? Huh? And I'm shocked. My thoughts, don't respond to people you don't know. For your own sanity is part of it, but also, not everybody is even a real human on social media. So you're kind of getting invested emotionally in a conversation with someone who may not exist, okay? Just to start there could save a lot of stress. I do think it's important to turn off the feeds. Periodically, everyone has their own threshold. Mine, unfortunately, is pretty low. I can't tolerate a lot, especially when it comes to live news. So I can read news, but I can't listen to live news. That's my threshold. So take care of yourself. Turn off your accounts for a while, or don't check them for a bit. Some people compromise by taking them off their phones. Now, when it comes to people I do know, I go into it with an assumption that I want this relationship on the other side. So I give a lot of benefit of the doubt, and I try to talk specifically about the issue that's on the table instead of getting emotional and reactive. It's one of those like 2 or 3 responses, and then I'd really love to continue having this conversation with you. Let's schedule coffee. Because if someone's not willing to engage with you at that level, it's okay to let it go. We do have to make decisions about how invested we're willing to be. And folks are much more courageous. I'm not thinking of this as the vulnerability kind or the moral courage kind of courageous, but they're a lot more brazen when there's a social media tool between them and you. So Brene Brown has this great quote where she talks about, I no longer care about the feedback from anonymous folks in my life. If you're in the arena with me, so if you're in the boxing ring with me, then I care about your feedback. But if you're just a critic, I'm sorry, I'm not going to become invested in what you have to say about it. So.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Oh, that's one more question. All right, good, I'm coming.
Okay, so I'm really bad with my words, so I'm sorry I'm going to butcher this. But before you can even have conversation about topics like these, I don't know if anyone else can relate, but I kind of shut down. Like, I can't read it, I can't listen to the news. If conversation is happening around me, I tend to just be in the other direction because it's hard. And because I don't know if my emotions can handle all parts of it, so I don't even initiate engagement with any part of this. So what would you say about feeling passionate about these topics but not being able to explore them because of your own emotions? How can I get to a point where I can explore these different areas without being so broken down about them?
I appreciate you sharing and being so honest about it. And I'm sure you're not the only person in the room who struggles with that, so thank you. Start with compassion and non-judgment towards yourself. Remember, we're talking about a collective traumatization. So we are not alone. And I just want that to sit for a second. We are not alone in what we're experiencing. It's a collective limbic hijack. That's a Tara Brach quote, okay? So I love it because it's a little cheesy. So that would be my first thought. And then sometimes it's good to just start with ourselves, It could be writing, journaling about what you wish you would have said, the issues that you care about, coming to your own framework around how you think about things, how you deal with things. Also asking permission to not engage in a conversation. If it's someone that's dear to you, you know, if it is Uncle John at Thanksgiving dinner, you know what, I actually care a whole lot about this. So I don't want to take it off the table because I don't care. I just want to take it off the table because I do care. Can you respect that today? So when there are people that you care about, if it's mutual, it's okay to expect that to be heard and that limit to be set. And then sometimes there's small steps. You know, sometimes we can do in our professional roles what we can't yet do in our personal roles. I used to have an expectation at the domestic violence program that you can't hear oppression without addressing it. That was a professional expectation that I had of the folks who worked there. And they would say, what? And I would say, I don't care if you mess it up. These are messy conversations, right? All you have to say is, that sounded a little offensive to me, and I just need to acknowledge that. And then you can move on. But that may be a place to start too. You know, it's just that idea of, that feels attacking, that feels offensive, that feels harsh, hurtful. Just want to mark it and let it go. So, okay. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Charlene, thank you so much. So, just another shameless plug. If you are free tomorrow evening, we do have Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum here on campus. I encourage you all to come out, and she will be in Fuller Auditorium. And they also have a few lunch opportunities, so if anyone would like to have a late lunch with Dr. Tatum, come and see me afterwards. We'll be having lunch at 1:30 in Marsh Memorial. I've only got seating for about 5, so make sure you come and see me. Also, our next Pride Talk is going to take place on November 13th. We're going to try something a little bit different. As you know, we are one campus, even though we've got 7 regional campuses. So we've got Dr. Eric Castillo from our Houston campus that is going to be visually on this screen. And he is going to share with us his thoughts in terms of race and place in the Ivory Tower, thinking about race and higher education. So look forward to continuing this dialogue. Today's dialogue was absolutely on point when we talk about daring conversations. I asked them that you all go out and dare to ask difficult conversations, dare to engage in difficult conversations. Because I think when we stop, that's when we cease to keep moving on. So keep asking questions, keep dialoguing, and keep the momentum forward. So thank you so much, Charlene. Thank you everyone for coming out.